Okay, welcome. It's really great to see all of you out tonight. I was chatting with a few people and they informed me they weren't here last time, but they watched it online before they came tonight. And I was like, man, you are like the ideal students preparing for class. You know, when you hear the term flipped classroom, which gets thrown around a little bit here, that idea is exactly that. Putting something online for students to watch in preparation for the next discussion. So you've actually experienced that, those of you that have taken that opportunity. So when someone says flipped classroom, say, yeah, I've been part of one of those. You know, and just look really cool and it'll all be good. So welcome. I'm really looking forward to tonight for lots of reasons. We lay, I think, a pretty good groundwork last time around executive function or executive skills. And so tonight we're going to dive in a little more specifically, both in terms of the executive function that we're looking at, as well as in the way that we do that work. So, but before we do that, I just want to start with who's here. I always like to do this, and it's a good thing for me to know kind of from which school. So how many folks are here that have children in the junior school? Hands up, please. Okay, good chunk. How many have children in middle school? Okay. And how many have children in senior school? Okay, awesome, great, welcome. How many are guests of a family from St. Michael's? A few, great to have you here. How many are faculty or staff here? Yeah, so a nice chunk of folks as well. I'm excited because some of these ladies have partnered with me for tonight's session, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I wanted to start tonight because we're going to dig into emotional control in a little bit. And so I wanted to start. I had the opportunity this weekend to do a Skype with my 17-year-old nephew. Just wanted some time to chat through some of the options. He's in grade 12. Some of you have children at this place, you know, and thinking about his future. And he told me a story that I want to share with you because I think it really powerfully speaks to what we aspire to in emotional control in our kids. My nephew is a 17-year-old boy. He's athletic. He won MVP in the rugby sevens in the Toronto finals. So he's got a lot going on. He's a smart kid. He's a sensitive kid. And he spent last summer as a counselor at camp. And his favorite week was the week when he worked one-on-one with a disabled, mentally and physically disabled adult, 22-year-old man. And he raved about this experience, loved this experience. And he was with this person 24/7. So sure, they were in the boats together, and they were getting up, and they were getting dressed together, and he was bathing him and toileting him, like doing things that, you know, 17-year-old boys don't generally do. But he loved it. Flash forward to a couple weeks ago. He's on the streetcar in Toronto heading out of downtown with his girlfriend. They're coming back from something they'd been doing. And a little bit up further on the streetcar are two people that he described to me as, it seemed they'd had hard lives, Auntie. I'm not sure what was going on for them, but it seemed like they'd have a bit of, maybe they were street people, maybe they were crack addicts, maybe they were disabled. You couldn't really tell. But these two people, a man and a woman, the man was sort of just rocking and repeating things and saying things, and the woman had a mirror, and she was sort of obsessively fixing her face and her hair over and over and over again as they traveled on this streetcar. Within a couple of minutes, there was about a 30-something man behind my nephew who said, oh, geez, I wish I had my phone. I'd love to capture this on the phone. It's so entertaining. My nephew is a sensitive soul, stiffens. His girlfriend gives him the look, which is, not now, dear. We're not going to engage now. And the ride continues. My nephew ignored the second, third, and by the fourth comment about this sort of frustration around not having a phone to video this sort of behavior for their entertainment, my nephew turned to the man behind him and he said, what sort of person chooses to find their entertainment in the, you know, harshness or the upset of someone else? What kind of person does this? To which the man said, they're crackheads, they chose to be crackheads, it's their fault, their entertainment, da-da-da-da-da. And my nephew said, we don't know they're crackheads. We don't know their story at all. And I think it's really odd that me, as a 17-year-old boy, at the height of my selfishness, according to society, has to speak to you, a 30-something man, about what's appropriate on a streetcar. Well, then he turned back and he said the man just said really rude things for most of the rest of the ride. But he sat there, and I thought, you know, he didn't get mad. He didn't yell and scream. He waited to see if it would pass. He demonstrated a whole lot of things and emotional control. And I, as an aunt, was really proud to hear that story. I think my brother, his dad, was a little nervous because who knows what people carry on streetcars, right? And you don't really want to get into altercations, and I get that. But in fact, we want to raise our kids so they know when to express the emotion and when to not, that they know how to express the emotion that they're feeling, that they're given situations and they're able to plan ahead so that they can show up as their best selves and not be dragged under by some of the other stuff. And so that's what we're hoping to start into as we meet together tonight, to look at, in fact, emotional control. So what are the goals for tonight? I want to review because I do understand that we're really busy people and new folks join us all the time, and some didn't have a chance to watch the video online. So we're going to do a really quick review of what we're talking about when we say executive function. I want to talk broadly because each time that we meet, I think it's important we all go away with ideas, principles, and strategies to use in our homes. And so we're going to talk about some principles, and then we're also going to look specifically at emotional control. So just as a reminder, these were pieces that we talked about last time. I'll give you a second just to have a look at that. So we want to notice that executive function are mental processes that we all have to use. We talked last time about the complexity of our world and about how important it was for our kids to have the skills to survive within that world. That it's getting to be, in some ways, less about knowledge and more about skills in the direction that we're going. We also talked last time about the 2 dimensions, and this is outlined in the Smart But Scattered books that we're using as a bit of a guideline. But that idea that we have both thinking executive function and behavior executive function. And we talked about how often they're very linked. What we think is often how, impacts how we behave. And so those 2 pieces are tightly woven together. So what I'd like to do now, before we get right into the whole idea of emotional control, is I'd like to share about 5 principles that could work with any specific executive function and with specifically emotional control. And I think that, we'll look through these. These also are taken from our Smart But Scattered book. So the first principle is the idea that we need to teach our kids the skills. We can't assume by osmosis that everything we do is going to be internalized. We need to really help our children to do the things that we see that they need to do. And there are lots of ways to do this. We're going to be talking about that tonight. But we really do want our kids to learn the behaviors that they're missing. I also wanted to point out that we don't expect 5-year-olds to plan and pack their lunches, usually maybe a portion of the lunches. We don't expect our 10-year-old who's going to camp to pack his own suitcase for a week away, I don't think. And we certainly don't put our 14-year-olds living on their own in an apartment, right? We are slowly, as parents, trying to determine what is the appropriate activity for the age group that we have in our homes. And that shifts as the children develop. There's a checklist actually in your package that sort of talks about, and it's a very general thing, but it's always good to have, I think, some guidelines about what is kind of appropriate at which level and what we might expect. Sometimes, as parents, we're saying, oh my goodness, my child can't do this or that. And then when we step away and think about it, I've heard parents, and they've talked to me about wondering if there maybe the child isn't there yet developmentally. It's a task that's a bit beyond kind of their natural ability at this point. Good to know that. Good to know that. And then to plan for it accordingly. We're going to talk a little bit in a couple minutes in more detail about this, but that idea about how we're moving from external to internal. In other words, we talked last time about loaning our children our prefrontal lobes, right? That they don't, theirs are developing and ours are supposedly developed. And so we're going to loan our prefrontal lobes to our children. And in doing that, we're going to set them up for success. And so that's why this starts externally, right? When we taught our children to cross the road, we first said, look both ways before you cross the road. We took their hand, we walked them across the road. We probably did that for a stretch of time. Then we might have, evolved to the place where we stood and watched them cross the road. And then eventually they had moved that learning from the external to the internal. And they knew to look both ways and cross the road before they did. They'd internalized it. So as parents, we're often starting outside and working our way in. This is a really interesting principle, and I was thinking a lot about this as I was preparing, because it sounds really easy, right? Provide just enough support for your child to be successful. But there's actually two bits to that. One is just enough support, right? And then for the child to be successful. If we provide so much support ongoingly, the child may be successful, but they need us to keep providing that support. If we don't provide enough support at the outset, then it can be really frustrating for that child. So it's a tricky balance. I get that. I live that dream with you as a parent. If we, how when your children are really little and they're just learning and they're learning how to open doors with door handles, and so they walk up and they put their hand on the door handle. Often what happens is we put our hands over theirs and we turn the door handle and they get that feeling. And then gradually the next time they may come up to the door and we stand there and we see what they do. And they may put their hand on the door handle. It may not quite work. We may have to a couple more times, lay our hands over and help them make their way through. Eventually it'll get to a place where we can just stand there and they'll know how to open that door. But it would not serve them if we consistently opened that door every time they went through and they never learned how to turn the handle. Neither would it serve them at their very first time, when they're barely reaching the handle, to stand there and go, well, you got it in you, kid. Like, let's see you go, right? So we want to find that balance of that external support and giving them enough support so that they're successful. It gets really tricky because I now am living that dream because my children are 5,000 kilometers away. And I have lots of things I think I need to continue to support them on, and yet they're saying, Mom, you're like 5,000 miles away, we're okay. So it's that dance that you do, hate to tell you, but for a while longer. Don't restart. Sorry. The other one is when you do stop the supports, I guess I'll hide that and hope I'm done in 15 minutes. When you do stop the supports, you want to fade them gradually. So we want to be really careful when we're helping our students, and it can be really tempting, right? You put them in place. You guys going to save me? See, this is why I love these people. You're about to be logged off. Shut the whole deal down. Okay. What was I saying? It can be really tempting when we're helping our child do something and we see that they've mastered it to go, woohoo, you can do it, see ya, good luck with that, right? And this is really saying, okay, they did it once. Once in a row is not enough, right? We need to do it a few times. And so that being sensitive to when is it okay to try and pull back is really, really important. It's not working? All right, okay. So those are the 5 principles that I want to talk to you about. The second piece before my computer shuts down, oh, it's not even letting me. The other piece, so those are 5 principles or ways of thinking about getting our kids more experience and understanding with executive functioning skills. The other piece that I want to share with you is something called an ABC model. And we're going to use this in the second half of tonight because you're going to look at a case study and try to apply this model to that case study of an aged child around the age of your child. And so how this works is, this is a model actually, by the way, that's used by a lot of professionals when they're thinking about supporting behavior in kids in schools or in different contexts all the way along. So the ABC model, A stands for antecedent, B is behavior, and C is consequence. And all of these pieces fit together, and I think they'll work really well as we look at the emotional control. That was great that it worked when you were standing there. But okay, I'm going to stand here. So A stands for the environment. And remember a minute ago, one of the principles we talked about was you want to work from the outside in. You want to set up the context so that you and your child has the best shot at success. So environment is a really big piece. And it's often, as a parent, and I know I've done this lots, something happens and we react, and we may not take the time to actually think through what was going on at that time that, Susie or Johnny had this particular situation emerge. So when we talk about the environment, there are a number of ways that we can actually modify the environment, right? And we take that on again because we're that sort of acting prefrontal lobe for our parents. We've done this for years. We put gates across the stairs. That's external, right? When kids were learning to walk. And we also moved the breakables out of reach when they were little. We might have even put our Christmas tree in a playpen. Was that just me that did that? But there are all these things that we've sort of done externally so that we can ensure that our kids are safe and protected. Now we do it, we run their schedules and we try to ensure that they have enough sleep and enough to eat and so on. And so we continue to manage sort of the external environment. So there are some ways that we can, when we're looking at what's going on in the environment, that we can actually adjust that. So for an example, if your child is easily stimulated, maybe he doesn't have 4 friends over to play, maybe he only has 1. And so we manage the number, 1 friend at a time, because we know this about our child, and we know that that might just be too much in terms of environment until he grows up a little more. We can make some things off limits, and we do that as parents. You need to be in by this time. We put a fence around the yard. Sometimes if we're parents of teenagers, we hide the car keys, but that's a bit extreme. But that's an example of a barrier, right, that we set up. We want sometimes to reduce distractions. So if we have a child who has a hard time focusing, we might choose to have quiet time so that in the house, quiet time for homework, quiet time for sleep. And so that's, again, an external way of setting that up. Structures, lists, that sort of thing is also another way that we manage the environment. Sometimes as parents, the children our child is associating with might not be working well for them. And so we might want to say, you know what, that particular child seems to really push your buttons. Let's look at how we can broaden the social circle and include some other people, or maybe take some time away from that particular child. I think you want to be really careful when you do that, and you want to do it in conversation, but you still are the parent, and you still can see things that your child may not see. The second piece around this is task. Okay, so we're talking about, it could be the environment and it could be the task that might have created a problem or a challenge for your child. So in the task, sometimes, like, we would all choose to spend our time in a way that we want to, that we love, that we enjoy. Not many of us go home and go, woohoo, I get to clean the garage this weekend. This is my lucky day. Like, these are not most of us. Some of you might, not me so much. So we want our kids to learn that sometimes they have to do tasks that they don't love to do. That's just life. That's just part of grit and perseverance that we've talked about before. But we also, if we're helping our kids develop these executive function skills, we want to make it manageable. So we want to make the task appropriate size-wise for our children. So that goes back to the developmental stuff we talked about. If it's going to be a longer task, then maybe we're inserting breaks. We want to make steps explicit. We might have something at the end of the task to look forward to doing together. We can talk about paying kids to do chores, but that's a whole other topic that I'm not talking about tonight. We may create a schedule for the child. We want to build in choice or variety. We might even think about making the task into a game. How many things can you pick up in a minute that's on the floor? And let's time it. Let's see if we can do better than we did last week. Or we have a bunch of chores. Put your hand in the jar and pick a chore for tonight. What's your chore going to be? Even adding that element of fun will help our kids begin to plan and understand that they can do these manageable tasks. So environment, some things we can do. Task, we want to look at what are they being asked to do. Is it manageable? And the third piece is our interactions with them. So the more that you understand about executive function, the more you're probably realizing that you can really promote the growth of executive function skills in your child. And in your relationship and how you relate to your children creates this space for learning for them. So as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, before you go into a situation, and these suggestions come really, I think, linked well to emotional control. If you're going to go into a situation that you think might become tricky for your child, then you can practice or talk ahead about what they might expect. These are ways to kind of cue their emotions and prepare them for what might be coming. During the time that you're in the situation with the child, you may agree on some emotional cues that would remind the child of what it was that you wanted them to do. Growing up, our family had a set of family friends with same-age kids, and we skied together, just in Ontario, so small hills, but still, it was fun. And so at one point, I remember being away. I was probably, I don't know, grade 6 or something. We had 6 kids between sort of grade 3 and grade 8 or 9 on this adventure. And the mother, the whole time, I was reminiscing with my parents last night, the mother kept saying, "Gregory, remember our little talk." Or "Stevie, remember our little talk." Like she had this "remember our little talk" phrase, and it came out all the time. I'm not suggesting that's the most effective way, but certainly we all were aware that they'd had a talk. Some preparation had been done, and there was some things that were expected. And that's, that kind of verbal cueing could be really helpful for our kids. And during a time when you start to notice, again, you're that frontal lobe for your child, you start to notice that they're struggling, you may want to just call a timeout and say, you know what, I'm just going to pull you aside for a sec and check in with you and just see how things are going and try to de-escalate a situation before it gets too tricky. You folks are like the detectives on behalf of your child's executive functioning skills. So not only do you have to loan them their frontal lobe, but you're actually a little bit of a detective, right? Because you're trying to notice what are the things that are triggering them in the context that they find themselves. And then you're having those conversations with them. Once you've come through a situation, the other place where interactions can play out is in praise. But remember when we talked about fixed and growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work, we talked about praise as a specific thing. Not a, "Oh, you're so awesome," or "You're so gifted in athletics." Not that kind of praise. We're talking about, "I like the way you started your homework with only one reminder," right? Or, "I really appreciate that when your brother was teasing you, you were able to ignore him." Those sorts of praise after the situation will go miles to reinforcing the behavior that you're looking for. And finally, the last piece I think around interactions is an opportunity to debrief for the next time. So in our school, we have a feedback model that we use, and I think I've mentioned it to you before, but it's very simple. We talk about what went well, what was tricky, and I love tricky because that doesn't mean, what totally went off the rails, what went sideways. It's like, what was tricky? That's easy to talk about. And what do we need to do differently next time? So what went well, what was tricky, and what do we need to do differently next time? So we're back full circle to what I started with was we need to teach our kids some of these skills. And by teaching, we're having intentional conversations. And they're owning it too, right? You're asking them what went well. You're giving them an opportunity to say, this was really good. I mean, we have a range of ages here, so you need to adjust it to your child's age, and we'll help you do that in a minute. But that principle is there. So A is for environment. B is behavior. And we talked about teaching, and that can happen naturally, or we can take a more targeted approach. So we've talked a bit about conversations and what they could look like to try to encourage that. There are a lot of games that really help executive functioning skills. So I'm thinking about chess and checkers, right? Because there's that planning and sustained attention and response inhibition. A variety of games work. Monopoly and Clue is, again, your planning and your working memory. There's some fun ways to really get at executive functioning skills. Another way is family activities. Can you involve your child in the planning of a trip or an outing? And if you did, what could that look like? And in that, you just want to make sure that they actually can handle what you're giving them and that it's a real thing. If you say, I'd like you to decide where we're going to go for dinner on 2 nights out of our trip, then you need to support that decision and help the child make a good decision for the family and make it a positive experience. So if that's appropriate age-wise for your child. The second piece around B is teaching the behaviors. And we're going to break very shortly, and we'll go through this in a little more detail. But the plan is out there. We're identifying a behavior, we're setting up some goals, we're outlining the steps, checklist, and so on. That sounds very clinical, and really what we want to do is we want to be really intentional about what it is we want to focus on, how we want to set our kids up for success, what we need to put in place for that, and what the conversations look like. Okay? And the last piece in terms of this model is getting buy-in. And it's consequences, but I think it's also, we were talking together, the group of us, it's also about what do we want our kids to learn? We just don't want to set up a bunch of consequences. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing is reinforcing the learning that we want to see. So the consequences are there. The last piece around consequences is trying to frame it positively. So instead of saying, you can't play video games until you've cleaned up your room, flip that and say, when you've cleaned up your room, you can play video games. As much as possible to try, it's a very semantic thing, but when you start with the can't, everybody gets their back up. And if you could avoid that, it might save you all a bit of grief. It's hard to do in the moment, for sure. I'm always trying to think, how do I need to say this? So that's the ABC. The A is the environment. What led to this? The B is the behaviors. How do we want to teach some specific behaviors? And the C is the consequences and the learning. If it doesn't work, what are you going to do? And if it does, what were you learning? What were you wanting them to learn? Oh, dear. It doesn't matter. We're just about good to go anyway. So what I would have shown you is that last time when you were all here, and I'll get this going for when you came back, parents that were here last time chose what they wanted to focus on, and emotional control was ahead by quite a bit. And so that's why we're going where we're going tonight. And I think in your package you might have the definition, but when we're talking about emotional control, I'm going to define it and then we're going to break up. Is that in your package? Okay, perfect. So you want, when you're developing emotional control in your children, or when we're developing it within ourselves, we want the ability to manage our emotions so that we can achieve goals, complete tasks, and also control and direct your behavior. So my nephew was exerting a huge amount of emotional control, if I know him, because he had a whole bunch of things he would have liked to have done in that moment with that gentleman behind him. And so we just, what is that now? Oh, it's a phone. Okay. All right, love technology, all over technology tonight. Okay, so if we are able to do emotional control well, then we can deal with the good and the bad in our life, right? That's true for all of us, and that's what we want our kids to get to. We don't want something to throw them so off the rails that they can't regain and recoup. So that's a really important piece. We want to be able to keep cool in emotionally charged situations. That's important. Being able to articulate and access your prefrontal cortex when you're upset is important. And then to not be overcome, as we've talked about. I could go into all the stages of how this happens, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's not that relevant right now. What I would like to do with you is to tell you that we're going to do something a little bit different here tonight, and different only in that we're going to try, and this is from feedback from parents, to break into more age appropriate. So when we're talking about emotional control for a teenager, or we're talking about emotional control for a 7 or 8-year-old, it's quite different. And so I wanted to give you that opportunity to do that. So fortunately, with me tonight, I have 3 faculty that are going to be helping us. And I'll just tell you how this is going to happen, and then we'll move along. So we have Laura Miller. Laura Miller is she's the head of human resources at the senior school, and head of human resources, the head of learning resource. Yeah, she'll be firing me tomorrow. Yes, the head of learning resource and at the senior school, and she is going to be working with the K through 5. She's a parent of 3 children, ages 2, 5, and 7. We've had some real fun actually prepping for this because these women are trying all these great things at home, and so it'll be fun for you to work with her. Sue Vachon is the middle school learning resource teacher, and she also works K through 12 on the ministry initiatives and making sure we're doing everything right in alignment with the ministry. And she has 2 children, 5 and 8, and she will be working using her middle school experience with the middle school folk. And Claire de Roseron is learning resource at the senior school, and she does a great job supporting all of our teenagers, so she's going to stay with me here, and we're going to work on senior school students and emotional control. And Claire has 1 little guy who's almost 4. So they are an amazing resource on all sorts of fronts. So what I'm hoping that we're going to do now is I'm going to ask you, each of these women is going to take a group, and we're going to morph out. So Laura, you're going to 116. So if you have a child, let me tell you what the plan is before you move. This is so like school. You're going to have about 20 minutes in this group to actually do some applying of the ABC model to a case with the hopes that it feeds what you're thinking about with your child, right? That's ultimately where we want to go with this. And then you're going to come back. We'll come back about 5 to 8. We'll do a draw and wrap up. I need to give you your bucket. This was what I was trying to show you before of the survey. So you can kind of see the executive functions along the bottom. You can also see where we might be going. Sustained attention, task initiation, and goal-directed perseverance. We might roll those all in together because they're kind of connected. So just as you're heading home, I'm always interested, and this is really good for our brains too, to consolidate. What's one idea or strategy that you're taking home with you tonight from the discussions and the learning that we've done together? One thing, yes?
The buy-in, getting the younger person involved so that they feel that they're part of it.
Yeah, that there's this genuine sort of interchange that says, hey, I value you, and we're going to work this out together. Awesome. What else? Yep?
To me is to find that balance, not expect too much or too little from it.
Right, so finding that balance. Awesome. And that's tricky, right? Because every child's individual. Like, I've given you charts, but like certainly look at your child and think about whether that fits or not. What else are we taking away? Yeah?
I really liked what you said earlier about the praise. This was
Praise.
reinforced at the end of the spring series last year.
Yes.
And talking about don't tell your kid they're smart.
Yes.
You know, be specific about what they do. I like the way that you did something.
Yes.
Otherwise, they expect that.
Yeah. Good to remember, because it's so easy to just say, you're so smart, you're so beautiful, you're so whatever. Yeah. Welcome back, group. We're just talking about what we're actually taking away in terms of learning. You guys will have more learning, so we'll be expecting to hear quite a bit from you because you had a bit longer time together. No, just kidding.
Heather, I have a question.
Yes.
Just continue on the praise, because the example you gave, we concentrate on the good behavior.
Right.
What advice you give for the opposite?
For the bad behavior.
For the bad behavior, the meltdown.
It's a great question. They melt down in the supermarket where everybody can watch. And you want the floor to open up. I guess my advice, especially when we're thinking about them, and this is just advice, I am not a parenting expert, let's be clear. My advice would be really pay attention to your own emotional reactions when your child is having an emotional reaction. Because as best we can, we apparently have a full-on prefrontal cortex that helps us manage our own emotions. And so we are modeling. We can say that's not acceptable, or we need a timeout right now because you can't hear me. You're yelling so loudly. So we need to take a break. I'm going to ask you to sit over here or stand over here or go to that room or whatever. And when you are calmed down, we will speak again. But the trick in that is coming at that from a calm place. Because, yes. My doctor told me when I had a 2-year-old, your child at some point is going to have a tantrum in the grocery store and you're going to want to throttle them because you're going to be embarrassed. Like it's coming from a place of embarrassment. And she said, I just want you to know right now, every parent has had a child have a tantrum in the grocery store. And the looks you get are looks of compassion and sympathy, and I know how that feels. Right? And so we know as parents that we've all gone through things and we see others going through it. We're not judging them necessarily, or at least we want to be careful not to. And as we are receiving the tantrums as parents, we want to try as best we can, we're not superhuman, to stay in that place of modeling emotional control, right? Because they're going to learn from us as best we can. I get that we're human. Yeah, well, wine. There'll be more wine after tonight, I'm just saying. We need to draw for the last group. Laura, do you want to draw the... We've had big wins already. This will be the last one.
I gave everyone in my group the strategy of
crumpling up their paper?
Crumpling up your paper, but only works if no one else crumples up their paper. Really, that was not a very good move on my part, so I'm just going to do this. Actually, yeah.
I'll get the book.
So this person believes in my strategy. Ruth.
Great. Awesome. Okay. So just any other ideas quickly before we wrap up tonight that you're taking home with you? Group, we asked the other two groups what they felt about breaking out to a smaller group. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, thumbs up? Okay. Just to give you a heads up, our last session like this will be January the 15th. I showed the two groups earlier, but sustained attention, task initiation, and perseverance. We'll try to roll them all in, see how we go with that. So that's what we're going to focus on. And then during Brain Awareness Week, and I hope in the next month or so to have some dates, we always have an amazing Brain Awareness Week speaker for the community and the parents. And that's really good fun as well, usually in the gym. And so that'll be that week in April, likely the Wednesday or Thursday of April. Okay? Any other questions before you head out? Has this raised anything that you... And there is more wine and cheese. Should you feel you need that at the end of this evening, you're most welcome to have that. All right. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you to my facilitators for doing a great job. All right. Have an amazing Christmas. That sounds so weird. And we'll see you in January. You're welcome.